Hey there, welcome back to Unmuted Voices, where we're unlearning silence, reframing our voices, and speaking with more confidence and courage, one brave moment at a time. I'm Aisha, founder and chief communications coach at Start in the Beginning, longtime market research executive, and author of Unmuted Voices How We Hear Accents and Learn to Judge Differently. More on that book soon. Today's conversation is one I'd wish I'd had years ago. We are talking about boundaries, misunderstandings, and the courage to speak anyway. Here's what we're going to do today. First, we'll talk about what to do when your words get twisted and how to stay visible. Then we'll dig into why boundaries protect your voice, they don't erase it. And finally, we'll talk about how courage isn't about winning arguments, it's about staying connected to your voice, even when it feels risky. Let's get into it. First things first, we need to normalize this fear of being misunderstood. If you're afraid of being misunderstood, you are not alone. In fact, it's extremely normal. We're wired to react more strongly to negative feedback than positive, a phenomenon called negativity bias. It's why one misunderstanding can feel 10 times heavier than 100 affirmations. And when you layer on differences, background, culture, language, that fear grows. You're not just worried about being misunderstood, now you're worried about being misrepresented. But here's the truth: misunderstanding is inevitable, silence isn't. If fear of being misunderstood is the only thing that's keeping you quiet, you're giving away your power before the conversation even starts. So let's talk about boundaries. Boundaries are not barriers, they are filters. They don't block you from speaking, they protect how much of yourself you give away. You can set limits without closing yourself off. You can clarify once and know that you don't have to explain yourself into oblivion and exhaustion. In Unmuted Voices, the book I wrote, it's not your job to make yourself smaller or more palatable to be understood. The burden of understanding doesn't belong only to the speaker, it's shared. And what I meant by that when I wrote it was you are responsible for clarity, but not for carrying the entire weight of someone else's willingness to understand. You can speak your truth clearly, respectfully, and still hold a boundary that says, I'm not going to explain myself into invisibility. So, boundaries are there to protect your voice, not to erase it. Now, earlier I mentioned that misunderstanding is inevitable, but silence isn't. No matter how carefully you speak, some people will misunderstand. Some are going to twist your words. That doesn't mean you failed. Psychologists call this cognitive load. The more you explain and re explain, the more strain you actually put on yourself and the harder it gets to communicate well. More words aren't always better. Sometimes fewer clear words and a solid boundary are your best tools. You can clarify once with kindness, but you don't have to chase someone's approval or twist yourself into something you are not. I don't know how many of you watched Shonda Rhimes' Scandal, which was absolutely one of my favorite shows. But I remember there was one scene where I believe it was Olivia Pope who said to one of her associates, either speak faster or say fewer words. That stuck with me, especially in this field. Again, underlining that sometimes fewer clear words and a solid boundary are your best tools. But I digress. So here's what you need to remember: misunderstandings aren't a sign that you failed in your communication. They are just an occupational hazard of doing meaningful, courageous work, putting your voice out there, no matter what field you're in. And as Maya Angelou, and you must have guessed by now, is one of my favorites, she said, I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. So you can stay visible without shrinking. Now, let's talk about some practical tools because this is my jam. We want to know how to do this on a day to day basis. We'll talk about four. We'll see. The first one is resilience reframe. So when you're misunderstood, pause and ask yourself, is this about me or about their lens? Let me explain this. Psychologists call this notion self distancing. You create a little mental space between you and the misunderstanding, and it helps you respond with more clarity and less emotional charge. Distance can help you recover much faster. So you think, is this a me issue or the lens through which they're seeing this issue? And once you determine which one it is, you're able to actually respond with more clarity and you don't just jump right to an emotional response. The second one I'll share is the clarify once practice. I'm a huge fan of this one. You're going to prepare some short but kind clarifications. So you can say something like, let me restate that more clearly. Or here's what I meant by that. If they continue to twist, remember, you don't have to chase understanding. Just make sure that if you do say you're going to restate it more clearly, you do restate it more clearly. All right. So let's go to number 3, boundary phrases. These are some things that you can say to yourself internally, but you can certainly say them externally, depending on the environment, depending on who the audience is as well. Some of these may not fly over very well with somebody who's your superior at work, so use your discretion. But certainly something that is good internal mantras. Once you've already said something clearly, or rather you feel you've said it clearly, in your own mind, in your own gut, think of these 3 things. I trust what I said. I'm open to clarifying once, not debating endlessly. And I can't control how it's received, only how it's delivered. Keeping these things at the heart of how you communicate will be really helpful, but there might be some instances in which you might need to actually say that verbally. Let me throw one more in here for you all. Do a courage check in once in a while. Ask yourself, am I protecting my peace or am I disappearing altogether? Courage isn't about being louder, it's about being present without self erasure. You can stay kind, you can stay clear, and you can stay visible even when it's uncomfortable. If today's conversation gave you permission to set better boundaries or rethink what courage looks like, that is powerful work. Boundaries don't close you off, they help you stay connected to what matters most: your voice, your peace, your presence. 3 things without which you can't serve your mission or your purpose adequately. If you want more tools, more conversations, and early access to Unmuted Voices, the book, before it's officially released, come find Unmuted Voices, the podcast, on Instagram and YouTube. We are building a community of people who are unlearning silence, one voice, one boundary, one brave word at a time. And if this episode made you think of someone who's been carrying too much, send it their way. You never know who needs permission to speak, and stay standing. Next time, we'll talk about something I know many of us struggle with: choosing when to speak and when not to. We'll call that Voice Boundaries Part 2. Until then, your voice belongs here. Thank you for tuning in. Talk soon.